So, all throughout history, we have been using different methods of torture for different reasonings, interrogation, because we're Americans and we're sick in the head. Um, yeah, just multiple reasons for torture techniques to be used. But we're going over some of, if not the worst, used throughout history. I'm your host, Brett. Stay tuned. This first one is something you all are familiar with, more than likely, and it is crucifixion. Now, it wasn't just Jesus who went through this, and it didn't even stop at biblical days. Crucifixion involved being tied or nailed to a wooden beam or cross, whatever it was at the time, and nails were then pierced through the bones below the wrist to bear the weight of the entire person. You are just hanging there, holding yourself up by your wrists. So, it was a brilliant placement because no major blood vessels at all were harmed or hit, and only a median nerve were hit. Only the median nerve was hit, and that would basically cause your fingers to seize and the hands to flex down in this excruciating pain. And so the feet were also nailed to the vertical part of the cross. And once the legs weakened, the arms had to be held up by the entire body, resulting in your shoulders being pulled out of their sockets, and the elbows and wrists would soon pop out of the sockets and follow, and the arms, now several inches longer, because it's not attached to the socket anymore. At this point, the chest had to bear the entire weight of the body. So then you would start having breathing problems. And once these respiratory issues hit, they would be followed with eventual suffocation. And this was practiced, dude, until the 20th century. That's fucking wild. Like, that's a really long time to be hanging people from a cross and not know that we were still basically crucifying people. That I didn't realize it was until the 20th century. This next one is a pretty rough and vile one, so be prepared, because I hate this one. This is probably the torture technique that would work on me the quickest. The second I see a fucking rat, I'm out. Like, game over, I'm done, you can get me the fuck out of there. This one is called rat torture, and this was when a rat was placed inside of a small cage that was, like, positioned against the victim's abdomen, and the cage was heated from the outside. So they would, like, take a cage or a bucket, place rats in it, and then they would heat the outside, and the inside would get hotter. And so as the inside was getting hotter, these rats would try to escape. Well, the only place that they had to escape into was the only available soft surface that was around them at the time. Now, these rats had no other escape, no other option other than to go through the basically insides and intestines, guts, all that of the person that was being, I guess, interrogated or tortured for whatever reasoning. And so these rats would dig their way through your abdomen and claw their way, and it was the most excruciating pain you can imagine. And so this technique effectively got information out of prisoners and played on their psyches, and this is how they added a lot of psychological element back in the day to torture to get answers out of people. The breaking will. This was reserved for public executions strictly, and there are variations on this practice, but generally the prisoner was tied to a large wooden spoked wheel, and once tied there, the executioner type dude would basically start breaking the leg bones. And with this torture technique, they were not trying to kill them. They were trying to basically get them as close to death as possible. So they would spin them on the spoked wheel, tied up, and the executioner dude or whatever, he would take this iron bar and beat the fuck out of them until they were almost dead. And they would crush all their bones, bludgeoning them, break their legs. Now, after these prisoners or people who committed crimes, after they were bludgeoned and beaten to almost near death, they would then take their heels and put them together and reposition them on the wheel so that their heels came together behind their fucking necks. They were then left there to bleed to death. This next one is the most fucking metal way I've ever seen anything done. And not even literally, like, this is... Okay, let's go into the Blood Eagle. Okay, the Blood Eagle is what this is called. So the Blood Eagle ritual was first mentioned in... What is it called? Late Skaldic poetry. And the victim would lie in a prone position and be kept alive as their back was sliced open. Their ribs were then detached from their body and their spine, and the lungs were pulled through the opening to form a pair of bloody wings. Your lungs pulled through your fucking wings. Okay, so they would make these bloody wings, and it is hard to imagine one staying conscious. Now, most of us would not be able to stay conscious throughout this entire ritual because it's excruciating. Like, you're gonna end up dead more than likely just from the shock that your body goes through with this technique. So, if you do get through it, you made it through the worst torture technique that Vikings did, period. This next one is pretty metal in a quite realistic and actual sense of the word. So, back in the day, they would restrain their victim and pour boiling molten gold down their throats, and it would basically burn their insides alive, and they would die from excruciating pain. And oh my god, it did damage to organs, it did blistering of the lungs, and it was immediate death, but oh my god, could you imagine having to look at what is about to happen to you with this? This one is used a lot, weirdly enough, and this is exactly why I don't eat a lot of animals, because I can't watch an animal get skinned, much less a fucking person. So, we're going to talk about flaying. And flaying is basically skinning, which was perhaps the most painful of all ancient world execution methods, because it was slow, my dude. It was a slow, painful process. The victim was first stripped, and their hands and feet were bound. And this was to stop any movement at all. And after this, the executioner would begin peeling away the individual's skin. And this was with a sharp blade, often starting with the head, as this area inflicted a fuck ton of pain. So, yeah. Now, the victim in this instance would obviously be conscious during the whole ordeal, so they would have to sit there and feel every cut onto their skin and every peel off of their flesh. And so they started with the head, as it was, you know, the most painful. And then in some instances, parts of the body were even boiled to make the skin easier to take off. And there were ways that one could die from flaying, which was shock from the body, not being able to handle it, or fluid loss, blood loss, hypothermia, infection. And the time of death could also be anywhere from a few hours to a few days. The Roman candle. History is filled with ruthless and psychopathic figures, and the Roman ruler Nero is one of them. And he hated Christians so much that he used them as Roman candles. Or torches. It was basically, you were turned into a human candle for his garden parties. So first, the victims were tied and nailed to these big-ass stakes, and then a flammable liquid or whatever was poured over them before they were set ablaze. The fire started at the feet to prolong their suffering, and whether the Christians had rebelled against them or not, they took them out, period. And this was a very, very barbaric and awful way to go. Like the Salem witch trials. This one's a pretty fun one. Kinda cute, not gonna lie. Back in the day, they also used to have this torture method where they trained Southeast Asian elephants to trample people as fucking crazily as they could. Like, as ruthlessly as they could stomp, they would stomp on these individuals, and that was a method of torture back in the day as well. Now, this next one is called white torture, and this was basically where they deprived you of all of your senses. They would put you in a white space, a prisoner cell that was white, clothes were white, and food were entirely white. The guards also dressed in white. Lights were kept on 24/7, and no color was seen and no words were spoken. So you basically just slowly went crazy. And there was actually a documented case of this from Amir Fakfar, who was actually arrested in Iran and subjected to this torture for 8 months in 2004. So, while the physical pain of sensory deprivation is minimal compared to majority of tortures, the psychological damage is beyond compare. Amir actually came forward after he was released and said that when he was released, he wasn't a normal person anymore. And he couldn't even remember his parents' faces. That's how bad of a toll that this had taken on him mentally. This very last one, drawing and quartering. Now, this was the most infamous methods of cruel and unusual punishment back in the day, as it was basically them in England in the 13th century. They used to tie people to a horse, and they would be dragged to the gallows, and then usually hanged, but sometimes they were disemboweled or beheaded, and then afterward, the condemned was quartered, or his body was cut into quarters, and sometimes they would tie each limb to a different horse and have them run in opposite directions. And this was usually for people that were guilty of treason back in the day. And this was actually abolished in 1867, so it wasn't like super a new fad or anything. But that's all for today, guys. Thank you guys for watching, listening, and I appreciate every single one of you that come onto this channel. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and As always, I hope you guys have a wonderful, safe night, and if you guys want to find more, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and on our website. So our Instagram and TikTok are going to be Truific Pod, and then our website is going to be truificpod.wix, W-I-X, site.com. And you can find all of our merch, all of our episodes, everything on there. Thank you guys, and stay safe, stay smart, stay spooky.